I received the note on a Tuesday morning, folded once, my name written in a hand I recognized immediately. Call me immediately, it said. Then, beneath it, a second line that made my fingers pause against the paper. And Daniel, do not trust your daughter. I stood there in the kitchen for a moment, the refrigerator humming behind me, sunlight cutting across the counter in a narrow line, and read it again to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. The handwriting was steady, deliberate. Richard Lawson had been my attorney for 32 years. He did not dramatize. He did not speculate. He did not write things like that unless he meant them. I set the note down beside my coffee. The mug made a soft sound against the granite, louder than it should have been. My hand rested on the edge of the counter. It didn't move right away. This was wrong. Richard didn't send handwritten notes. He called, or emailed, or had his assistant reach out. This was different. I picked up my phone and dialed his number from memory. It rang twice. Daniel, he said, and his voice was already tight, already somewhere ahead of where I was. You got my note. I did. My voice sounded normal. That surprised me. You want to tell me what this is about? There was a pause. Not hesitation. Calculation. Are you alone? He asked. I looked toward the hallway. The house was quiet. Emily had left earlier that morning, said she had a client meeting downtown. She'd kissed my cheek on the way out. Told me to call her if I needed anything. Yes, I said. I'm alone. Another pause. Then he exhaled, slow. Daniel, I need you to listen carefully. Do not discuss this with Emily. Not yet. Not until we talk in person. I leaned my weight slightly into the counter. The granite felt cool under my palm. You're going to have to give me more than that, Richard. They've filed preliminary documents, he said. Petitioning the court to evaluate your mental competency. The words settled into the room one at a time. I didn't react immediately. I noticed that. The way my mind held them, turned them over, looked for the shape of them. That doesn't make any sense, I said finally. It will if you look at the trust modifications filed last month, he replied. Documents. You allegedly signed. Allegedly. I stared at the note again, still sitting on the counter where I'd left it. My name in his handwriting. Firm. Controlled. I didn't sign anything, I said. I know, he said quietly. That was the moment something shifted. Not fear. Not yet. Something colder. More precise. Daniel, he continued. If this proceeds, they could legally assign a guardian to manage your finances. Your assets. Your property. Everything. I let that sit. Everything. The house. The accounts. The portfolio I had spent 40 years building. And Emily, my daughter, was listed on most of those documents as primary point of contact. I felt my hand close slightly against the counter. Not tight. Just enough to register. Who is they? I asked. Richard didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. We'll go over everything in person, he said instead. I want you to come to my office this afternoon. And Daniel, until then, you act exactly as you have been. You understand me. I did. More than he realized. All right, I said. I'll be there. We hung up. The kitchen was quiet again. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. I stood there for a long moment doing nothing, then reached for my coffee and took a sip. It had gone lukewarm. I didn't notice the taste. My mind had already started moving. Slow. Methodical. The way it used to when I was still working cases. Patterns. Timelines. Documentation. I set the mug down carefully this time. No sound. My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 68 years old. I spent 4 decades as a forensic accountant, tracing financial discrepancies most people never even knew existed. I had seen fraud dressed up as care before. Seen signatures that looked right until you knew how to look at them. Seen families unravel over numbers written in neat columns on clean paper. I had just never expected to be on the inside of one. I walked to my study, closed the door behind me, and sat down at the desk. The chair creaked slightly as I leaned forward. My computer screen lit up. Password entered. Accounts opened. I didn't rush. That would have been a mistake. Instead, I started where I always did. With the numbers. They don't lie. They just wait for someone patient enough to read them. And as the first statements loaded onto the screen, a thought settled in quietly, almost gently, as if it had been waiting for me to catch up to it. If Richard was right, then whatever this was, it hadn't started yesterday. It had been building, right in front of me, and I had missed it. Emily came home at 4:30 that afternoon, right on schedule, like she always did. I heard the garage door open first, then the soft hum as it closed again. Her footsteps followed a moment later, light, confident, familiar. I minimized the account window on my screen before she reached the hallway. Not quickly, not in a way that would suggest urgency, just a natural movement, the kind you do when you are finished with something, or pretending to be. "Dad," she called out, her voice warm, carrying easily through the house. "I am back." I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Then I stood, smoothed my shirt with one hand, and stepped out of the study. She was in the kitchen, setting her purse on the counter, her hair still perfectly in place despite the long day. She turned when she saw me and smiled the same way she always had. "Open. Easy. Practiced." "Hey," she said, stepping closer and kissing my cheek. "How was your day?" I noticed the details the way I always had. The faint scent of her perfume. The way her eyes held mine for just a second longer than necessary. Measuring. Or maybe I had never noticed that before. "Quiet," I said. "Did some reading. Nothing exciting." She nodded, already moving toward the refrigerator. "That is good. You need quiet days," she said. "Less stress. Less stress." The phrase settled somewhere in the back of my mind. I had heard it before. Not once. Not twice. Repeated, casually, over the past few months. I watched her take out a bottle of water, twist the cap, and take a small sip. Her movements were controlled. Efficient. "Did you take your supplements this morning?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. There it was. Another familiar line. "I did," I said. My voice stayed even. She smiled again, satisfied, and set the bottle down. "Good. They are helping. You seem more relaxed lately." "More relaxed." I nodded slightly, as if I agreed. As if I had not just spent the last hour staring at numbers that did not belong. "I have been thinking," she continued, leaning lightly against the counter. "Maybe we should schedule another checkup. Just to be safe. Dr. Keller mentioned it last time." Dr. Keller. I pictured the man's office. The soft lighting. The slow way he spoke, like every word needed to be carefully placed. I had not questioned it then. I had trusted her. That word again. Trust. "We can look at the schedule," I said. She seemed pleased with that answer. Not relieved. Not surprised. Just pleased. As if it fit into something already decided. "I can handle it," she said. "I will call them tomorrow." Of course she would. She handled everything now. The appointments. The bills. The paperwork. It had started gradually, after Margaret passed. Small things at first. Helping with forms. Sitting in on meetings. Then more. Always framed as support. Always reasonable. I had let it happen because it made sense. Because she was my daughter. Because I had been tired. I watched her move around the kitchen, opening cabinets, checking something on her phone, completely at ease. There was no tension in her shoulders. No hesitation in her movements. If there was anything wrong, she did not carry it. That told me more than anything she could have said. "I have a meeting this evening," she added. "Client dinner. I might be back late." I nodded. "That is fine." She picked up her purse again, already halfway to the door. Efficient. Always moving forward. "Do you need anything before I go?" she asked. I shook my head. "No. I am good." She paused, just for a moment, then smiled again. "All right. Call me if you need anything." Anything at all. Then she was gone. The door closed softly behind her. I stood there in the quiet kitchen, listening to the sound fade. The house felt different after she left. Larger. Emptier. Or maybe just more honest. I walked back to the study and closed the door behind me. This time I locked it. The click was quiet, but it carried weight. I sat down at the desk and reopened the account statements. The numbers were still there, waiting. They had not changed while I was away. They never did. $4,200. Every Tuesday. Sometimes Thursday. Same amount. Same pattern. 14 months. I pulled up the authorization. Logs. Digital signatures. Timestamps. Everything looked clean at first glance. It always does. But I had spent my life looking at things that were meant to look clean. I leaned closer to the screen. Compared entries. Cross-referenced dates. There were inconsistencies. Small. Easy to miss if you were not looking for them. I had not been looking. That was the problem. I had trusted the system because I believed the person managing it. I sat back in the chair and let the realization settle fully this time. Not rushed. Not resisted. Just accepted. This did not start last week. It did not start when Richard sent that note. It started months ago, maybe longer, and I had been here the entire time, sitting in this same chair, drinking coffee at this same desk, telling myself everything was fine. I placed my hands flat on the desk. They were steady. That surprised me again. I looked at the closed door, then back at the screen. All right. I made a decision. From this point forward, every word I spoke, every reaction I showed, every movement I made would be deliberate. If there was something happening inside my own house, something planned, something documented, then I was going to see it clearly. And I was not going to let them know that I could. I did not sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind would not stop working. Numbers, timelines, patterns. They moved in quiet loops behind my eyes, arranging themselves into something clearer with each pass. By morning, I already knew where to look next. Not the main accounts. Those were meant to be seen. I went deeper. Transaction logs. Authorization records. The kind of data most people never open because it looks too technical, too dense. To me, it was familiar, almost comforting. I sat at my desk just after 6 in the morning, before Emily woke up, before the house started moving again. The screen cast a pale light across the room. Everything else stayed still. I opened the first log and began reading line by line. Timestamps. IP addresses. Authorization methods. Each entry told a small part of the story. Alone, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern. It took 20 minutes before I saw it. Not the transfers themselves. I already knew those. It was the signatures. Digital authorizations linked to my name. They appeared clean, verified, properly logged. But the timing was wrong. Too precise. Too consistent. I leaned forward slightly, bringing the screen closer, and pulled up my own activity history. Email usage. Login times. Device records. Then I placed the two sets of data side by side. There it was. Every authorization tied to my name had been executed within a 30-minute window. Always late afternoon. Always between 4 and 4:30. The same window Emily was almost always home. The same window she had started bringing me tea. I sat back slowly in the chair. The memory came back clearly. She would walk into the study, set the cup down beside me, smile, ask how I was feeling. I would take a sip. Warm. Slightly bitter. I had never questioned the taste. Supplements, she said. They would help me stay calm. Focused. Less anxious. I stared at the screen again. The pattern did not move. It did not change. It just sat there, waiting to be acknowledged. This was not random. This was not a mistake. This was a system. I clicked into one of the authorization entries and opened the verification details. Two-factor authentication. Sent to my phone. Confirmed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the phone. Same device. Same number. I scrolled through the message history for that day. Nothing. No code. No notification. I checked another date. Same result. A third. Nothing. I felt my hand close slightly around the phone. Not tight. Controlled. This was wrong. I had seen this before. Not in my own accounts, but in cases I had worked years ago. Manufactured authorization. Intercepted verification. Systems that appeared legitimate because every step was recorded, but the process itself had been redirected. Someone had access. Not just to my accounts. To my identity inside the system. I placed the phone down carefully beside the keyboard and opened the device management panel. Linked devices. Authorized sessions. There were 3 active entries. My laptop. My phone. And a third device I did not recognize. No name. Just an identifier. Last accessed yesterday. 4:18 p.m. I looked at the time. 4:18. Right in the middle of that window. I did not react immediately. I let the information settle, the way I always had. Emotion clouds pattern recognition. That was something I had learned early. In my career, you do not chase what you feel. You follow what you can prove. I clicked into the device record and traced the access path. Local network. Internal. Not remote. That meant the device was inside the house. The realization did not come as a shock. It came as confirmation. I turned my head slowly toward the door. It was still closed. The lock still engaged. The house was quiet. Emily had not come down yet. I checked the time again. 6:42. I had maybe 20 minutes before the routine began. I moved quickly now, but not carelessly. Screenshots. Exported logs. Saved copies to an external drive I kept in the drawer. Then another copy to a secure cloud account I had not used in years. Redundancy. Always redundancy. Evidence does not exist unless it survives. When I finished, I closed everything down to exactly the way it had been. No extra windows. No open files. No trace of urgency. Then I sat there, hands resting lightly on the desk, and let out a slow breath. This was no longer a suspicion. This was evidence. Physical. Verifiable. Replicable. I could prove that the authorizations were not mine. I could show that a third device inside this house had been used to access my accounts. I could map the timeline. I could build the case. I heard movement in the hallway. A door opening. Footsteps. Light. Measured. Familiar. I stood up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out a random volume, opening it to the middle as if I had been reading for some time. When Emily stepped into the doorway a moment later, I looked up and smiled. Calm. Neutral. Exactly as I had always been. Morning, she said, her voice soft, her expression warm. You are up early. I nodded once. Could not sleep much. Thought I would do some reading. She glanced at the book, then back at me, studying my face for a fraction of a second longer than usual. Then she smiled again. That is good, she said. Keeping your mind active is important. I closed the book gently and set it down. I agree, I said. And as I looked at her standing there, relaxed, unguarded, completely certain of the version of me she believed in, I understood something with absolute clarity. Every word I spoke from this point forward would be part of the record. Every reaction, every pause, every decision. This was no longer about what I suspected. It was about what I could prove. And I was not going to make a single move until I had everything. I arrived at Richard Lawson's office at exactly 1:15 in the afternoon, 10 minutes earlier than he had asked, the way I always had when something mattered. The building had not changed in years. Same polished stone floors. Same quiet reception area. Same muted artwork on the walls that looked expensive without trying too hard. I checked in with the receptionist, who recognized me immediately and gave a small, polite smile. He is expecting you, she said, her voice low, controlled. Of course he was. I took a seat in the waiting area, hands resting loosely on my knees, and watched the second hand on the wall clock move in steady increments. I did not look at my phone. I did not review the evidence again. I already knew what I had. Repetition would not change the facts. At 1:23, his office door opened. Daniel, he said, standing there, his posture straighter than usual, his expression tighter than I had ever seen it. Come in. I stood, smoothed my jacket once, and walked toward him. His office smelled faintly of leather and paper, the way it always had. Familiar. Grounding. He closed the door behind me and did not sit down immediately. Instead, he moved to his desk, picked up a thin folder, and held it for a moment before looking at me. Before we start, he said, I need to ask you again. Have you discussed anything with Emily? No, I said. Nothing. He nodded once, satisfied, then gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. I did. The leather creaked slightly as I settled back. He remained standing for a moment longer, then finally sat down, placing the folder between us. He did not open it right away. That told me everything I needed to know about how serious this was. Richard Lawson did not delay for effect. He delayed when he was deciding how much to say first. What I am about to show you, he said carefully, is already filed with the county court. Preliminary, but active. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. Documents. Clean. Organized. Legal language structured in precise blocks. I leaned forward slightly and began reading. Petition for evaluation of capacity. Recommendation for temporary guardianship. Proposed assignment of financial oversight. My name appeared multiple times. So did Emily's. Not as a co-petitioner. Not as a neutral party. As the recommended guardian. I read the first page. Then the second. Then the third. I did not rush. My eyes moved steadily across each line, absorbing the structure, the wording, the intent. It was well prepared. That was the first thing I noticed. Not amateur. Not rushed. This had been built carefully. Over time. They are positioning this as a medical concern, Richard said quietly. Cognitive decline. Decision-making impairment. Progressive. I did not look up. Based on what? Medical evaluations. Statements from your primary physician. Supplementary notes from a consulting specialist. I stopped reading. My eyes settled on a name halfway down the page. Dr. Keller. I had expected that. Still, seeing it in print changed something. It made the structure real. Not theoretical. Not something that could be dismissed as misunderstanding. This was documented. Supported. Filed. You have seen him twice in the last 6 months, Richard continued. Both visits were documented. Both include observations that support diminished capacity. I leaned back slowly in the chair. The leather made the same quiet sound as before. "And these documents," I said, my voice even. "They say I signed off on financial restructuring." Richard nodded. "Yes." I did not. "I know." He reached into the folder and pulled out another set of pages, sliding them across the desk. "These are the trust amendments filed 3 weeks ago." I took them and read. Asset reallocation. Control structures. Contingency clauses triggered by incapacity. It was all there. Detailed. Specific. My signature appeared at the bottom of each page. Clean. Consistent. Completely false. I placed the papers back on the desk and looked at him for the first time since I started reading. "If this proceeds," I said, "what happens?" He did not hesitate this time. "You could lose control of every financial decision within 30 days, he said. "Access to your accounts would be restricted. Property transfers could be executed under guardianship authority. You would still legally own your assets, but you would not control them." I let that sit for a moment. 30 days. Not a long time. Not when something had already been in motion for over a year. "And Emily," I said, "she becomes the guardian." "That is the recommendation," he confirmed. "Unless we intervene." I nodded once, slowly. My hands rested on the arms of the chair. Still steady. That detail stayed with me. "This is not just about money," I said. "No," Richard replied. "It is not." I understood that now. Fully. This was control. Legal. Structured. Backed by documentation that appeared legitimate from the outside. A system designed to move quietly until it was too late to stop. I leaned forward slightly, placing my hands on the desk this time. "What do we need?" I asked. He met my eyes directly. "Evidence," he said. "Clear. Verifiable. That these documents were executed without your consent. That the medical basis is flawed. That there is intent behind the structure." I nodded. That part one understood better than anything else in the room. "Do not confront her," he added immediately. "If they suspect you are aware, they will adjust. Close gaps. Destroy anything that connects the pieces." I almost smiled at that. Not because it was amusing, because it confirmed what I had already decided. "I will not confront her," I said. He studied my face for a moment, then gave a small, approving nod. "Good," he said. "Because if we do this correctly, we do not just stop it. We expose it." Expose it. The words settled into place. Not just defense. Not just survival. This was about revealing the structure behind what had been done. I sat back again, letting the room return to its quiet state, and thought about the device I had found in the logs. The third access point. The pattern of transactions. The timing. I already had more than they expected me to have. They just did not know it yet. "There is something else," I said. Richard's expression shifted slightly. Focused. "Go on." "I have already started looking," I continued. "At the accounts. The authorization records." I paused just long enough to let the weight of that statement land. "There is a device inside my house that does not belong to me," I said, "and it has been used to access my accounts for the last 14 months. Richard did not speak for a moment. He simply held my gaze, then nodded once, slowly. "All right," he said. "Then we are already ahead of them." And as I sat there in that office, with the documents laid out in front of me and the structure of it finally visible from the outside, I understood something with complete clarity. This was bigger than I had first thought. Not just a series of transactions. Not just forged signatures. This was a coordinated system, supported by medical documentation, legal filings, and controlled access to my own identity. And it had been built while I was living inside it. I left Richard's office with the folder in my hand and a clear set of instructions in my mind. Do not confront. Do not react. Build the case. The late afternoon light had shifted by the time I stepped outside, the sun lower now, casting longer shadows across the street. I stood there for a moment beside my car, not moving, letting the air settle around me. Then I opened the door, got in, and drove home the same way I always did. No rush. No sudden changes. Routine was protection now. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as it had that morning. Quiet. Orderly. Familiar. Nothing about it suggested what was happening inside. I turned off the engine and sat there for a few seconds, hands resting on the wheel. This was still my home. That had not changed. I stepped inside, set my keys down in their usual place, and moved through the hallway at the same pace I always had. Emily was in the living room, sitting on the couch with her laptop open, a glass of water on the table beside her. She looked up when she heard me. "Hey," she said, her tone light. "How was your afternoon?" I met her eyes and gave a small nod. Uneventful, I said. Ran a few errands. Nothing important. That was not entirely true. It did not need to be. She studied my face for a brief moment, then smiled and returned to her screen. Good, she said. You should keep things simple. Simple. The word landed differently now. I walked past her and into the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water I did not really want. My reflection in the window looked the same as it always had. No visible shift. No sign of what I now knew. That mattered. Perception was part of the structure. If she saw a change, she would adjust. I could not give her that. I took a small sip, set the glass down, and returned to the living room. Working late? I asked, gesturing lightly toward the laptop. Just finishing something up, she replied. Client review. Should not take long. I nodded and took a seat in the armchair across from her. Not too close. Not distant. Normal. The television was on, muted, a news channel running footage without sound. I watched the movement on the screen without really seeing it. My attention was elsewhere. Listening. Observing. She typed for a few minutes, then stopped, picked up her phone, and checked something. Her expression did not change, but her posture shifted slightly. Subtle. Easy to miss if you were not looking for it. Then she stood. I am going to take this in the other room, she said casually. Just a quick call. I nodded again. Of course. She walked down the hallway, phone already at her ear, her voice lowering as she moved out of sight. I waited. Not immediately. Not in a way that would suggest intent. I counted slowly to 15, then stood, moved quietly across the room, and stepped into the hallway. Her voice carried faintly from the kitchen. Not loud. Not whispered. Controlled. I stopped just before the corner, out of sight, and listened. No. It is already in motion, she was saying. A pause. Yes, he signed everything. Another pause. I felt something tighten in my chest, but my body did not move. He does not question it, she continued. He never has. I leaned slightly closer to the wall, careful not to make a sound. The floor beneath me felt solid. Grounding. We just need a few more weeks, she said. Then it will not matter what he thinks. A longer pause this time. I could hear the faint murmur of another voice on the line, too distant to make out words. Then she laughed softly. Not loud. Not exaggerated. Just enough to carry. He trusts me, she said. That is the whole point. The words settled into the space between us, even though she could not see me. I stayed exactly where I was. Did not shift. Did not breathe any louder than necessary. This was the moment. Not confrontation. Not reaction. Confirmation. All right, she said after a moment. I will handle it. Just stick to the timeline. Another pause. Yes, I know what I am doing. The call ended. I heard her set the phone down, then the faint sound of a cabinet opening. I stepped back silently, returning to the living room at the same measured pace, and sat down in the chair exactly as I had been before. When she walked back in a few seconds later, her expression was unchanged. Calm. Composed. Certain. Sorry about that, she said. Just work. I gave a small, understanding nod. Of course. She sat down again, picked up her laptop, and resumed typing as if nothing had happened. As if I had not just heard every word. I watched her for a moment, then turned my attention back to the silent television. My hands rested lightly on the arms of the chair. Still steady. That detail stayed with me again. Inside, everything had shifted. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just a clear, precise alignment of facts. I now had more than patterns. More than numbers. I had intent. I had timeline. I had confirmation that this was coordinated, deliberate, and ongoing. And most importantly, I had something she did not know I had. I did not look at her again. I did not ask questions. I did not change my tone or my posture. I simply sat there, present, calm, exactly as she expected me to be. Because now I understood the full shape of what I was dealing with. And I was not going to make a single mistake. That night, I did not return to the study immediately. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I followed the same pattern she expected. Dinner at 6. Light conversation. Nothing of substance. She talked about a client who could not make a decision. I nodded at the right moments. Asked one or two simple questions. Made the appropriate sounds of interest. My tone stayed even. My movements stayed relaxed. Across the table, she watched me the way she always had in recent months. Not openly. Not suspiciously. Just attentive. Measuring whether I was still exactly who she believed I was. You seem tired, she said at one point. setting her fork down. Did you sleep well last night? I shook my head slightly. Not really, I said. Just one of those nights. She nodded, almost as if that confirmed something for her. That is what I have been noticing, she replied. The inconsistency. That is why the follow-up appointment is important. There it was again. The narrative, carefully repeated, gradually reinforced. I took a sip of water and placed the glass back down with steady hands. You are probably right, I said. Agreement was easier, safer. It gave her no reason to adjust. She smiled, satisfied, and continued eating. After dinner, she insisted on making tea. That had become part of the routine. It will help you relax, she said, already moving toward the kitchen before I could respond. I watched her from the table as she filled the kettle, her movements practiced, efficient. She did not look at me while she worked. She did not need to. The system she believed in was already functioning. I stood slowly and walked to the living room, taking my usual seat in the armchair. The television played quietly in the background. A documentary this time. Something about coastal cities. I did not follow it. A few minutes later, she returned with the cup and placed it on the table beside me. Careful, she said. It is still hot. I nodded and reached for it, lifting it just enough to acknowledge the gesture. The warmth spread through my fingers. Familiar. Expected. I set it back down without drinking. Thank you, I said. Of course, she replied, then sat on the couch, picking up her phone. I watched the screen without watching it, aware of her in my peripheral vision, aware of the cup beside me, aware of the pattern I had already mapped. 4 o'clock. 4:30. T. Authorization window. It aligned too cleanly to ignore. I waited. Not seconds. Minutes. Enough time for the routine to feel natural. Then I lifted the cup again, bringing it toward my lips, pausing just before taking a sip. I forgot something in the study, I said, standing up. I will be right back. She did not look up immediately. Okay, she said casually. Do not forget to drink that while it is warm. I nodded once and walked down the hallway, the cup still in my hand. Inside the study, I closed the door quietly and set the cup on the desk. The surface of the liquid reflected the light from the lamp. Still, undisturbed. I opened a drawer and took out a small testing kit I had not used in years. It was not designed for this exact purpose, but it was enough to give me an initial indication. I dipped the strip carefully, watching the color change develop over a few seconds. I did not rush it. I did not look away. When the results settled, I compared it to the reference scale. Then I sat back slowly in the chair. There was something in the tea. Not something immediately harmful. Not something that would raise alarm in a standard setting. But enough to affect clarity. Enough to influence perception. Enough to support a narrative of cognitive decline if it was administered consistently. I looked at the cup again, then at my hands resting on the desk. Still steady. That detail mattered more now than ever. I stood, carried the cup to the small sink in the corner of the room, and poured it out slowly. The liquid disappeared down the drain without a sound. Then I rinsed the cup, filled it with plain water, and returned it to the desk. The weight felt the same, the appearance unchanged. I opened the door and walked back into the living room at the same measured pace. She glanced up briefly. Everything okay? She asked. Yes, I said, sitting back down and picking up the cup. I took a small sip this time. Water. Neutral. Safe. Just forgot to send an email. She nodded and returned to her phone. I set the cup down again and leaned back in the chair, my posture relaxed, my expression neutral. Inside, the structure had shifted again. I now had a physical component. Not just financial manipulation. Not just legal positioning. There was a method being used to influence how I was perceived. Consistent. Controlled. Integrated into the daily routine. I let the moment settle without reacting. That was the discipline. That was the difference between suspicion and proof. She believed the system was working. She believed I was still inside it. Unaware, compliant, predictable. And for now, that belief was the most valuable thing I had. I turned my attention back to the television, watching the movement of waves against a shoreline I could not name, and allowed the silence between us to remain exactly as it was. Because now, more than ever, I understood that every piece of this needed to be documented, preserved, and revealed at the right time. And that time was not tonight. The next morning began exactly the same as the one before, and that was intentional. I woke up at the same time, made coffee the same way, sat in the same chair, and opened the same newspaper I had not actually read in months. Routine was no longer comfort. It was camouflage. Emily came down at 7:15, dressed for work, her movements efficient, her expression composed. "Good morning," she said, stepping into the kitchen. "Morning," I replied, without looking up immediately, turning the page as if I had been following the article closely. She poured herself coffee, added cream, stirred it twice, then leaned lightly against the counter. "You look better today," she said. "More rested." I glanced up briefly and nodded. "I feel better," I said. That part was true, just not in the way she thought. She smiled, satisfied again, and took a sip. "That is good. We are on the right track then." The phrase stayed with me. We are on the right track. Not you. Not I. We. A shared process. A coordinated effort. I folded the paper neatly and set it aside. "I have been thinking," I said, keeping my tone casual, measured, "about simplifying a few things. The accounts. The paperwork. It gets harder to keep track of everything." I watched her reaction carefully. Not directly. Through the reflection in the kitchen window. Her posture shifted slightly. Interest. Not concern. "That makes sense," she said quickly. "I was actually going to bring that up. We could consolidate everything under one structure. Make it easier to manage." Of course she would. The structure was already built. I was simply stepping into the version of myself she expected. "I would appreciate that," I said. Agreement, again, gave her confidence. And confidence made people predictable. She set her cup down and reached for her phone. "I can call Richard and have him prepare the documents," she said. "No need," I replied, just enough hesitation to feel natural. "I am seeing him later this week anyway. We can go over it then." That was not the plan, but it sounded like one. She paused for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "That works," she said. "Just let me know what he says." I stood, rinsed my mug, and placed it in the sink. "I will," I said. She watched me for a moment, then picked up her purse. "I have an early meeting," she added. "I might be late tonight." "Take your time," I said. She smiled, stepped closer, and placed a light hand on my arm. "Call me if you need anything," she said. "Anything." The word repeated itself. Reinforced. I nodded once. "I will." When she left, I did not move immediately. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the garage door open, then close, the sound fading into silence. Then I walked to the study, closed the door, and locked it. The click felt different now. Not just precaution. Control. I sat down at the desk and opened the laptop, pulling up the files I had saved the night before. Transaction logs. Device access records. Screenshots. The test results from the T. Each piece sat in its place, clean, organized, ready to be used. But something was still missing. Confirmation of coordination. I had heard her on the phone, but I needed more than memory. I needed record. I opened a small drawer and took out a digital recorder I had not used in years. Simple. Reliable. No network connection. No traceable signal. I turned it over in my hand, feeling its weight, then placed it on the desk. This would be the next step. Not confrontation. Not yet. Documentation. I stood and walked to the bookshelf, selecting a thick volume and opening it near the middle. The pages created a natural cavity when pressed slightly, enough to conceal something small. I placed the recorder inside, leaving a narrow gap for sound, then set the book back on the shelf at eye level, angled toward the center of the room. From the outside, nothing looked different. Inside, everything had changed. I tested the device once, speaking a few quiet words from across the room, then played it back. Clear. Precise. Enough. I reset it and left it in place. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt empty. It felt active. Structured. Every space now had a purpose. Every movement had meaning. I returned to the desk and sat down, hands resting lightly on the surface. Still steady. That detail had become a marker. Proof that I was not what they were trying to present me as. I checked the time. 9:10. Emily would not be back for hours. That gave me a window. I opened the device access logs again and traced the unknown device further. Network path. Internal routing. Signal strength variations. Small fluctuations that suggested movement. Not fixed. Not hidden in one place. It moved through the house. I mapped the strongest signal points across time. The pattern narrowed the location. Living room. Kitchen. Occasionally the hallway. Never the study. That told me something else. Whoever was using it avoided this room. Or believed there was no need to use it here. I leaned back slightly, letting the information settle into place. Living room, kitchen, areas of routine, areas where I was expected to be passive, visible, manageable. I closed the logs and looked toward the closed door, then back at the recorder hidden on the shelf. The next phase had begun, not because I forced it, because the structure demanded it. They believed I was declining. They believed I was not paying attention. They believed I would not resist. And for now, that belief remained intact. I stood, walked to the door, and paused with my hand on the handle. There was one rule that mattered above all others now. Do not break the pattern. Not until everything is in place. I opened the door and stepped back into the house exactly as I had been before. Calm, measured, predictable. Because the more certain they were, the more they would reveal. And I was going to make sure I captured every part of it. Emily came home later than usual that evening, just after 8, the sound of her heels against the hardwood floor slightly sharper than normal, just enough to suggest fatigue or distraction. I was already in the living room, sitting in my usual chair, the television on low volume, a program playing that I was not actually watching. The recorder sat quietly inside the bookshelf behind me, already active, already waiting. Long day, she said as she set her purse down, exhaling softly as if releasing the weight of it. It looked like it, I replied, turning my head just enough to acknowledge her presence without focusing too much. Balance mattered. Too much attention would feel different. Too little would feel wrong. She moved into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and took out a bottle of water. I listened to the sound of the cap twisting open, the slight pause as she took a drink, then the soft click as she set it back down. Did you eat? She called out. I had something earlier, I said. Nothing heavy. That part was true. I had kept everything minimal today. Clear mind, clear body, clear observation. She stepped back into the living room a moment later, phone in her hand, glancing at the screen before looking at me. I might have to take a quick call, she said. Work-related. I nodded. Of course. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then walked toward the kitchen again, already raising the phone to her ear. The pattern repeated. Same location. Same tone. Controlled, confident, unguarded. I did not move immediately. I let a few seconds pass, then adjusted slightly in my chair, just enough to place my body in a position that looked natural if she glanced back. My hands rested loosely on the armrests. My breathing stayed even. My attention sharpened. Her voice carried clearly this time. Not loud. Not whispered. Exactly the range someone uses when they believe they are alone, but still aware of proximity. Yes, I saw the update, she said. A pause. No, he has not said anything. Another pause. I could hear the faint rhythm of the other voice through the receiver, but not the words. He is exactly where we need him to be, she continued. Routine. Predictable. I felt something settle deeper inside my chest. Not rising, not reacting, just locking into place. The documents are already filed, she said. Once the evaluation is complete, it moves fast. A pause. No, there is no risk. He does not even question the supplements. That word again. This time spoken without the softness she used with me. Direct. Functional. I kept my gaze on the television, watching the movement of images that meant nothing. My body remained still. My mind recorded everything. Jason confirmed the timeline, she added. We are looking at 3 weeks, maybe 4. Another pause. Her tone shifted slightly, lower now. More focused. The accounts are already positioned. The transfers are clean. Even if someone looks, it all traces back to his authorization. She stopped speaking for a moment, listening. Then she let out a small, quiet laugh. Not loud, not forced, just enough to carry certainty. He has no idea, she said. He never did. The words landed with precision. Not emotional, not exaggerated, just stated as fact. I did not move, did not turn, did not react. This was the moment that mattered most. Not what I felt, not what I wanted to say, what I could prove. Yes, she said after another pause. Dr. Keller already submitted his report. It aligns perfectly. Another pause. No, Richard will not be a problem. He is not involved in this part. That detail registered immediately. Important. Unexpected. I held it in place without reacting. Everything is structured, she continued. Once the guardianship is granted, it is done. She ended the call a few seconds later. I heard the phone lower, the faint sound of it being placed on the counter. Then silence. I counted slowly in my head. 5, 10, 15. Then she walked back into the living room, her expression calm, composed, exactly as it had been before the call. Sorry about that, she said. Just work. I nodded slightly. Of course. She sat down on the couch, picking up her phone again, scrolling as if nothing had happened, as if she had not just outlined the entire structure of what they were doing. I let a few seconds pass, then reached for the remote and adjusted the volume slightly, a small, meaningless action to maintain the rhythm of the room. My hands were steady. That detail returned again, anchoring everything else. Inside, the case had shifted from strong to complete. I now had financial evidence, device access records, chemical confirmation, and now, recorded intent. Clear, verifiable, time-stamped. I did not need to guess anymore. I did not need to interpret. They had explained it themselves. I leaned back in the chair, allowing my posture to remain relaxed, my breathing even, my expression neutral. Across from me, she continued scrolling through her phone, completely certain that the version of me she believed in was still intact, that I was still unaware, still passive, still predictable. And for the first time since this began, I understood that the balance had shifted completely. Not in a way she could see, not yet, but in a way that would matter when the time came. Because now, everything was documented. And when everything is documented, the outcome is no longer uncertain. It is only a matter of timing. 3 days later, everything was in place. I did not rush it. I did not skip steps. Every file had been duplicated, verified, and secured in locations they could not access. Richard had reviewed the recordings, the transaction logs, the device traces, and the chemical analysis. He had not reacted emotionally when he heard them. That was why I trusted him. He had simply nodded once and said, "This is enough." That was all I needed to hear. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. Temporary guardianship review. It had been filed under urgency. Of course it had. Urgency limits scrutiny. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:30, dressed the way I always had for anything formal. Dark suit. Clean lines. Nothing that suggested decline. Nothing that suggested confusion. Just consistency. Richard was already there, standing near the entrance, a thin folder in his hand. He looked at me once, briefly, then nodded. No words were necessary. We walked in together. The room was smaller than I expected. Functional. Quiet. A judge seated at the front. A clerk to the side. 2 additional chairs positioned across from us. Emily was already there. So was Jason. He stood slightly behind her, one hand resting lightly on the back of her chair, his posture relaxed, confident. They both turned when I entered. Emily's expression shifted immediately into concern. Perfectly timed. "Dad," she said softly, standing up. "You made it." I gave a small nod. "Of course," I replied. My voice was steady. She studied my face for a moment, searching for something that was no longer there. Then she smiled gently and sat back down. The judge called the session to order a few minutes later. Formalities were brief. This was meant to be procedural, efficient, controlled. Emily's attorney spoke first, outlining the petition. Cognitive decline, increasing confusion, financial mismanagement risk, supporting documentation submitted, medical evaluations referenced. The structure was clean, convincing, if you did not know what was behind it. I listened without reacting, hands resting calmly in front of me, breathing even. When it was finished, the judge turned toward Richard. "Response," he said. Richard stood slowly. "Your Honor," he began, his tone measured, precise. "We would like to submit additional evidence before any consideration of this petition proceeds." The judge nodded once. "Proceed." Richard placed the folder on the table and opened it carefully. No sudden movements. No theatrics. Just method. "We have documentation that directly contradicts the claims made in this petition," he continued. "Specifically, evidence of unauthorized financial activity conducted under the appearance of Mr. Harper's consent." The room shifted slightly. Not visibly, but enough to register. Emily's posture tightened for a fraction of a second. Jason's hand moved off the back of her chair. Small changes, but real. Richard continued. "We also have recorded conversations that establish intent, coordination, and timeline regarding the petition itself." That was the moment everything changed. Not outwardly, not dramatically, but in the way silence deepens before something breaks. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Recorded conversations," he repeated. Richard nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." He reached into the folder and removed a small device, placing it on the table. With your permission, the judge gestured. Play it. The room remained still as the recording began. Emily's voice filled the space first. Clear. Controlled. Unmistakable. He is exactly where we need him to be. A pause. Then again. He does not even question the supplements. The words did not sound different here, but they carried differently. Heavier. Final. I did not look at her. I did not need to. The recording continued. Timeline. Structure. Authorization. Intent. Each piece placed exactly where it belonged. No interpretation required. Just facts. When it ended, the room stayed quiet for a moment longer than necessary. Then the judge looked up. Not at me. Not at Richard. At Emily. Her expression had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The certainty was gone. Replaced by calculation. Adjustment. Too late. Do you wish to respond? The judge asked. Her attorney began to speak, but she raised a hand slightly, stopping him. That told me everything I needed to know. She started, then stopped. The structure she had built depended on me being unaware. That was no longer true. Richard spoke again, calmly. In addition to the recording, we have full transaction logs, device access records, and independent verification that the financial authorizations attributed to Mr. Harper were not executed by him. He paused just long enough. We are prepared to submit all documentation. The judge nodded slowly. Submit it. Papers moved across the table. Evidence entered into record. Clean. Organized. Complete. I sat there, hands still resting in front of me, posture unchanged, expression neutral. This was not the moment for reaction. It was the moment for completion. The system they had built was now fully visible. Not as suspicion, not as theory, as fact. And once something becomes fact in a room like this, it does not go away. It does not shift. It does not disappear. It stands. The judge closed the folder after reviewing the first few pages, then looked up again, this time at both of them. This petition is denied, he said. Effective immediately. The words were simple, direct, final, but they were not the end. They were the beginning of something else. Because once the structure is exposed, it does not just collapse. It is examined. And when it is examined, everything connected to it follows. I stood slowly when the session ended, not rushing, not looking back. Richard gathered the documents beside me. Emily did not speak. Jason did not move. And as I walked out of that room, I understood something with complete clarity. They had built a system to take control of everything I had. And in the end, that system had become the very thing that revealed them. I did not go home immediately after the hearing. That would have been the expected move. Instead, I walked out of the courthouse beside Richard, stepped into the late morning light, and stood there for a moment without speaking. The air felt different. Not lighter. Not easier. Just clearer. There will be follow-up actions, Richard said beside me, his voice calm, measured as always. They will likely face formal investigation. Financial exploitation. Fraud. Possibly more, depending on what the review uncovers. I nodded once. I had already understood that. The moment the recording played, the outcome had shifted beyond the room we were standing in. I will handle the filings, he continued. You do not need to involve yourself further unless you choose to. Choose to. That was the difference now. Choice had been taken from me quietly, systematically. Now it had been returned the same way. Thank you, I said. He gave a small nod in return, then turned and walked back toward the building, already moving to the next step, the next document, the next process. That was who he was. I stood there a few seconds longer, then turned and walked to my car. The drive back felt shorter than usual. Not because the distance had changed, but because the weight of uncertainty was gone. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same as it had the day before. Same structure, same quiet exterior, but I did not see it the same way anymore. I stepped inside, set my keys down, and stood in the entryway for a moment. No movement, no sound. Emily was not there. I did not check where she was. That was no longer my concern. I walked through the house slowly, not searching, just observing. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. Each space still held the routines that had been built inside it. The patterns, the assumptions. I paused briefly in the doorway of the study, then stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The desk was exactly as I had left it. Clean, ordered, controlled. I sat down in the chair and rested my hands on the surface. Still steady. That detail had carried me through everything. Not strength in the way most people think of it. Not force. Not confrontation. Just control. I opened the drawer and looked at the recorder for a moment before placing it back inside. It had done its job. Not because it captured something dramatic, but because it captured something real. Truth does not need to be loud to be effective. It just needs to be clear. I leaned back in the chair and let the silence settle around me. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, there was no pattern to track. No hidden structure to uncover. No next move to anticipate. Just space. That was unfamiliar. I stood after a moment and walked to the bookshelf, adjusting the volume slightly, returning it to its original position. Small things mattered. Restoration mattered. Not because it erased what had happened, but because it redefined what remained. In the kitchen, I filled a glass with water and took a slow sip, setting it down in the same place it had been days before. The house felt different now. Not empty. Not broken. Just honest. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. I looked at the screen before answering. Emily. I let it ring once more before picking up. Hello, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Not long. Just enough to register. Dad, she said, her voice quieter than usual, stripped of the confidence I had heard before. I need to talk to you. I did not respond immediately. Not out of hesitation. Out of clarity. There is nothing to discuss right now, I said calmly. The situation is being handled through the proper channels. Another pause. Longer this time. I did not mean for it to, she began, then stopped. I did not interrupt. I did not fill the silence. That was not my role anymore. I will have my attorney communicate anything necessary, I said. Take care of yourself. Then I ended the call. Not abruptly. Not emotionally. Just completely. I placed the phone down on the counter and stood there for a moment, looking at the reflection in the window. The same man as before. The same house. The same life. But something had shifted at its core. Trust, I realized, is not something that disappears all at once. It fades in small moments. Missed details. Ignored patterns. Assumptions left unchallenged. And when it is gone, what remains is not anger. Not even loss. It is clarity. I walked back to the living room and sat in the chair, the same chair I had been in when all of this began. The television was off now. The room was quiet. And for the first time, that quiet did not feel like something hiding beneath the surface. It felt complete. I rested my hands on the armrests and looked ahead, not at anything specific, just forward. There are people who believe that control comes from force, from confrontation, from making yourself heard. But that is not how it works. Real control comes from understanding, from patience, from knowing when to move and when to wait. I had spent my life building systems, reading patterns, following numbers to their conclusions. I had simply never expected to apply those same skills to my own life. But in the end, the principle was the same. The truth is always there. It does not hide. It just waits for someone willing to see it clearly. My name is Daniel Harper, and I am no longer a man living inside someone else's plan. I am the one who saw it, documented it, and ended it. And that is something no one can take from me.